All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let's begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tammuz, Daniel and Bava of Chashmonaim Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in commemoration of their father, Rabbi Shlomo ben Yehuda Aryeh Vei, whose first yahrzeit is occurring this month. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah's Neshama will have an aliyah and the family in Nechama. Our week of learning sponsors, the Brem family from Ramat Beit Shemesh, Le'ilui Nishmas, their mother, Leah Riva Chaya Bas Meir, Mrs. Louise Brem, on the occasion of her 25th yahrzeit, and our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Meir and Chava Weinheber, in memory of Sarah Malka Bas Aaron Yehuda, Zichron Levracha, on the occasion of her first yahrzeit. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamos have an aliyah, the families in Nechama, all of our hostages will be returned B'Shalom and B'Karav, and our soldiers will be successful B'Chol Ma'aseh Yedehem. But with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't apologize for the little bit of the later start. Maybe you should say thank you. I don't know. All right. Hopefully, Meretz Hashem, we will still have enough time to be able to get through. I think we will be able to get through everything we need to do today. Today's daf is daf Chof. We are picking up on the bottom of Yud Tesma Beis 19b, and we left off. Actually, we left off literally last line. It's a good day yesterday. Last line on Yud Tesma Beis 19b. So if you remember again, just to reorient ourselves for a moment, we were dealing with a statement of Shmuel. So just reorient our case. Tuman Tara. Who knew that Tuman Tara could be so ridiculously exciting? So remember again, I have a corpse, and it's not like a good way to start the day, but all right, I have a corpse, and again, under a roof that creates Tumas Ohel, everything under the same roof as the corpse becomes tameh. If you have a wall between that corpse, let's say, and the rest of the home, rest of the structure, so that wall keeps the tumah on the inside. If, however, there is an opening in that wall of a tefach or more, then halacha l'maisa that allows the tumah to spread. However, if you plug up that hole, then halacha l'maisa the tumah is contained. We're dealing with the question of what can you use to go ahead and plug up that particular hole. So remember again, essentially, Shmuel explained that halacha l'maisa, the only thing that can plug up that hole is something that is going to remain in the hole, but something that is ultimately going to be removed from the hole, even though right now it's stationary, it's sitting there, but if at the end of the day, down the road, it's going to be removed, then halacha l'maisa, it cannot be called what we call, cannot be chotzeitz b'fnei tumah. It cannot plug the hole with the tumah. So the last case that the Gemara brought up was the case of, let's say, the grogros or the teven, the figs or the wheat inside of a utensil. So the Gemara said, Shmuel said, we view the utensil as if it's not there, and if the grogros and if the wheat could remain there on its own, then halacha l'maisa, it could be chotzitz b'fnei tumah. It could serve as a blockage to stop up the hole in the wall. Now, the reason why the Gemara went ahead and said if it could stay there without the utensil is because we are automatically assuming that the utensil itself is mekabel tumah. We are assuming the utensil is mekabel tumah, so because the utensil is mekabel tumah, therefore halacha l'maisa, it certainly cannot serve as an obstruction to the tumah. So now the Gemara is going to go back and revisit that. Hai chavis hechi dami. What is the case of the barrel? So remember again, so let's go back to the grogros for just a second. So I have a barrel of grogros, a barrel of dried figs, sitting inside of that hole in the wall. So the Mishnah, Gemara said, we view the utensil as if it is not there. If the grogros could sit there on their own, then they serve as a blockage to the opening. So Gemara says, let's talk about the barrel. Tell me a little bit about the barrel, right? This barrel hechi dami. What's the unique case of the barrel? So the Gemara says, so if its mouth, Rashi says, so we'll say if the barrel itself, now we're also presupposing that this is an earthenware barrel. So we'll say, okay, a lot of stuff being thrown at us early in the morning over here. The halacha is earthenware only becomes tameh from its inside, from its interior. In other words, if you take, let's say, a sheretz or something, or for this matter, mace, and you attach it to the outside of the kli chares, it does not become tameh. a kli chares only becomes tamei me'aviro, from its airspace. So what's the case? Say if the opening of the kli chares is facing away from the mace. In other words, so its opening is not towards the part where the mace is, but rather, again, we'll call it like the bottom or the side of the kli is facing towards the mace, but its mouth is open. Its opening is open to the rest of the house. Either pum labar, so which literally means if its opening is to the outside, top of chaf 20a, he gufa techotz. Then ultimately, again, the utensil itself could serve as a barrier. Right, because remember again, as long as the interior of the utensil is not open to the area in which the mace is situated, the kli itself is not mekabel tumah. If the kli is not mekabel tumah, then the kli itself acts as the barrier. Daha kli chares eino metame migabo, because the kli chares cannot become tamei from its outside. Rabbi say, it's one of these unique things. Remember, kli chares on one hand has certain incredible chumras. Like for example, once a kli chares becomes tamei, there is no way to be metaher it. Yet, interestingly enough, the only way for a kli chares to become tamei is from its interior airspace. So if you take an item that is tamei and stick it onto the side of the kli chares, the kli chares does not become tamei. So the Gemara says, if the utensil itself, so if the opening of the utensil is towards the mace, I understand why it becomes tamei. But assuming that the opening of the utensil is not towards the mace, but the opening is to the other part of the house, then the utensil itself should serve as the barrier. To which the Gemara says, Ella de pumulagav. So you must be talking about a case where the opening of the utensil is facing, we'll call it inwards towards the mace. So therefore it's contracting tumas mace from its interior. And that's why, again, we have to view, so the utensil is not of any help for us. Rather, we look at the grogros, we look at the figs inside of the utensil. And again, if the figs could remain in place without the utensil, and we talked about a case of where the figs are wormy, so no one's going to take them, so then they could serve ultimately again as the filling, so to speak, for the opening in the wall. So the Marviba, the other possibility is the Olam de Pum Labar. We could be talking about a case where the opening of the utensil is facing towards the side, is facing away from the mace. But what's the case over here? What are we talking about over here? A metal utensil. Now, I will say, remember, a metal utensil, unlike an earthenware utensil, can be makabel tumah how? Through tumah exposure on any part of the kli. So, for example, if you have, let's say, we'll call it the bottom of a metal utensil in the same airspace as a mace, it will contract tumah even though the opening is not there. Okay, so this is just the detail about the utensil. Fine. So we'll say, so bottom line, what we are left with over here is a sauce, and this is the point that we're going to keep on challenging. We have a statement of Shmuel. And the statement of Shmuel is that if you have an opening in a wall of a tefach that allows the tumah to go through, seal up the opening, and the tumah is contained. But the only thing that works to seal up the opening is what? I should say differently. The only material that you could use to seal up that opening is something that is going to remain there. If it's an item that over time is going to be removed, then it cannot serve as the sealant, so to speak, for the opening in the wall. That's the bottom line. Now we're going to challenge that. So basically, so we'll say some really interesting cases here. So meisvei asavin shetilshan v'nichan mechalan. So we'll say if you have grass, right? So asavin is usually like tall grass that you uprooted and you put it in the chalan. I will say these are all the same cases. Same case. I have mace. There's a mace in a room. There's a wall that's dividing between that mace and other area. Then fine, no problem. Then the tumah is contained. Now there's an opening in the wall of more than a tefach that allows the tumah to go out. Now I want to stop up that. I want to block up. I want to seal that opening. So we're going through examples over here. So now let's say you have grass, detached grass that you put in the opening. Remember again, Lashon we're also using over here is chalon. Chalon means a window, but in this context, it's not like a window. It means just an opening in the wall. So I uproot grass and I put it in the opening. Or for that matter, again, you have wild grass that's growing in the area and by itself seals up the opening in the wall. Or matlonios she'in bain shalosh al shalosh. Or you have pieces of fabric that don't have the area, dimensions of 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths. Take a look at Rashi. Sorry, not yet. So I'll say, so remember again, in general, we know, we've seen this so many times throughout Shas, that when it comes to pieces of fabric, if they are less than 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, then halach l'maaseh they're not makabel tumah. So again, so therefore I'm plugging up, so just we're talking about all different cases where you're plugging up the breach in the wall. So case number 1, I detached tall grass, put it in the breach. Case number 2, the tall grass grows by on its own and fills up the breach. Case number 3, I have a piece of material that's less than 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths that is filling up the breach, right? Or va'ever v'habasar medudalan bebehema ubechaya ubaof sheshachan b'chalam. It's an interesting case. I have an animal, right, the behema, or a chaya. So behema is a domesticated animal. Chaya is a non-domesticated animal. Oaf is a bird, fowl. And we'll say, now what happens? They have a limb on their body that's hanging. That's hanging. So it's semi-detached, it's hanging. But the way that it's hanging is it's situated in the opening in the wall. Situated in the opening of the wall. So I'll say, so again, so look at Rashi Midul Dalin, Shetlushin u'meurin b'mikzas. So they're semi-detached, but yet they're still semi-detached, which means they're still semi-attached. Va'behema omedes eitzel hachalon, va'iver munach al hachalon, v'tana ba'or va'rotav mitamin tumas ochlen bimkoman, utzrichen hechsher ve'elu lo hochsheru. So we'll say, interestingly enough, in certain respects, a dangling limb from an animal already has the status of ochel, of food, but again, in order for it to be makabel tumah, it has to come in contact with liquid. And in this case, again, it has not yet come in contact with liquid. So that dangling limb is sitting inside the opening, the breach in the wall. Okay, next case. Or oved kochavim sheyashav b'chalon, or for that matter, say you have an oved kochavim, an akum, that sits in the opening of the wall. Now, the idea over here, Rashi points out, is an oved kochavim is very interesting. We'll say an oved kochavim is not makabel tumah. Oved kochavim is not makabel tumah. So now again, the logic behind that ultimately is that he's not shaykh to the halachos of tumah and tara. So I just want to point out how fascinating this is, right? So an oved kochavim is someone. Now again, we use the term akum to essentially refer to anyone from the nations of the world. But again, in its true etymological state, akum means an oved avodah zara. Right? So oved avodah zara, someone who worships avodah zara, is not makabel tumah. So I'll say, so remember again, in order to be makabel tumah, a person also has to have the capacity for overwhelming kedusha. They're two sides of the same coin. So that's a unique status. That is enjoyed by Klal Yisrael. So therefore, again, only Klal Yisrael is makabel tumah, right? The Ummos HaOlam are not makabel tumah. It's fascinating. So I would say, so you have over here Tumah, this goes back almost to our dog excrement Gemara from yesterday, right? It's only where there is the greatest uncleanliness that you could come to cleanliness, and there's only where there is the greatest Tumah that you could come to Tara. So ultimately, again, only those who are capable of experiencing the highest levels of Tara could be subject to the lowest levels of Tumah. So Klal Yisrael, again, that's the burden a little bit that we bear. That on one hand we have the capacity ultimately for the highest levels of Tara, but as a result also we are makabel tumah. Versus again, often the nations of the world don't have the ability to necessarily reach the highest levels of Tara, and so because of that, ultimately are not subject to tumah as well. So an oved kochavim sits inside the opening of that wall. Right? Shmona. So Rabbi say this is very interesting. Shmona is a baby delivered at 8 months. Rabbi say, so obviously so much of this is societal. In the times of Chazal, if a baby was born during the 8th month, it was non-viable. Non-viable. Interestingly enough, at certain points, Chazal seemed to say that a 7-month baby was viable, but an 8-month baby was not viable. So to a certain degree, a baby delivered in its 8th month, Rahman al-Islam, was already considered to be almost not alive, not viable. So we'll see in just a moment. So therefore, again, in this case over here, that could also serve that baby, that premature baby that was in times of the Gemara not viable, could also serve as an obstruction in that wall. Salt, kli charas, earthenware utensil, the Sefer Torah. And a Sefer Torah, we'll say the common denominator amongst everything that we just listed in this list was kulam ma'atin bechalon. We will say all of these items, should they be situated in the breach of the wall, close up the breach. Now, again, what's the impact of closing up the breach? What does it mean closing up the breach? What does that mean? Prevent the tumah from spreading. Okay, so Rabbi says, so now we're going to go through this. This is really interesting. I'm going to go through this list one by one. By the way, Rashi points out over here, Hamelach lo mekabel tuma, delav ochelhu ba'anfei nafshe. See, interestingly enough, salt is not mekabel tuma. Why? Because salt is not considered to be a food item. Right? Salt is a condiment, right? Salt, I'd say, but salt by itself is not considered to be a food item. Therefore, it's not mekabel tumah. The case of kli cheres, Rashi points out over here, has to be where the opening of the kli cheres is not facing the mace. Only the back is facing the mace. So therefore, again, it's not going to be mekabel tumah. Okay, fine. So we'll say, so now, watch this. Aval, however, so that's the list of things that could serve ultimately, again, to plug up the breach in the wall. However, aval, hashaleg, snow, va'barat, hail, va'golit, frost, akfor, ice, v'hamayim, and water, kulan in mematem b'chalon. If you place any of these items in the breach, ultimately, again, they cannot plug the hole. They cannot plug the hole. Now, I will say now, bipashtos, because these items melt and these items could go out and flow away. So therefore, again, they cannot fill up the breach. Okay, so I'll say, so now, now what we're going to do is like this. So remember, this is a meisvei. Whatever you see a meisvei, it's a meisvei. A meisvei is always brought down as a kasha on a previously stated opinion. So now, I will say, this whole thing was brought, this whole entire brisa was brought as a kasha on Shmuel. Remember again, what did Shmuel say? Shmuel said that halacha l'maisa, if you go ahead and you have a hole in the wall, right? The wall that is dividing between the mace and let's say the rest of the home or another structure. And it will say what happens, and there is a hole in that wall of a tefach or more, the tumah goes through. That's not Shmuel, that's just the halacha. Shmuel said if you could plug up the wall and keep the tumah contained. However, it only works if you plug up the wall with what? With what? Something that you're not going to remove. But if it's going to be something that is removed, then that item does not work as a plug in the wall. So now we'll say, let's analyze this. The Gemara says, 1 second. Asavin, so case number one in the brisa was grass. So how could grass serve as a sealant? How could grass serve as a plug? Chazul behemto. Again, I will say, Pashas, you're going to remove the grass. Why are you going to remove the grass? Because you can feed it to your animal. Feed it to your animal. To which one says, no, ba'afrazta. We're talking about afrasta grass. So Rashi points out over here, afrasta is sam hamavis lebehema. So apparently, again, this was like a poisonous type of grass, which was very bad for your animals, and therefore, again, a person wasn't going to remove it to feed it to his animals. Fine. So essentially, again, I am pretty certain that it's going to remain in place. Next. O sha'alu me'elehen. So again, so case number one was where I detached the grass and plug the hole with it. Case number two is the grass sprouted up on its own. But say here's the issue. If we're talking about grass that sprouted out on its own, where the assumption is that grass is growing right next to the wall. So going back to yesterday's daf, remember again, what did we see? Even if you go with the idea that roots grow downwards, what do downward growing roots do? What do? They displace soil, and therefore, by definition, soften the soil around. So therefore, if I have grass growing by my wall, the pashas, what am I going to do? I'm going to pull it out. So if that's the case, then this stuff that's currently plugging the wall is going to be removed. If it's going to be removed, then halacha l'maaseh can't serve as a plug. To which the Gemara says, Amarabba bekosel churva. The particular wall in question, I will say, is already a decrepit wall. So remember again. So because of that, I'm not gonna. It's not worth my time to uproot the grass. I'm just gonna leave it alone. Okay. Rapapa says afilu bekosel yishuv. The truth is, it could even go out and be talking about a regular wall, a good wall. So why won't I go ahead and uproot the grass? We're talking about a case where the grass is growing more than 3 tefachim away from the wall. So this is long grass. So remember again, the roots of the grass are more than 3 tefachim away, like we saw in yesterday's daf. If it's more than 3 tefachim away, then what? Not a problem. But it's long enough to grow in to plug up the wall. Therefore, I'm going to leave it there. So we'll say, remember, just understand what we're trying to do. We're just trying to show each of these cases are cases where you're not going to be removing the item from the breach in the wall, and therefore it can serve to plug plug up the wall. Matlonios, the pieces of fabric. The Gemara says chazu lahu likriya delavusha. But again, the pieces of fabric, even though they're less than 3 by 3, they're still usable. I still may remove them. Why? Because I could use them as a patch for clothing. As a patch for clothing. To which the Gemara says, no, bisamichta. It's thick fabric. It's thick fabric. So because it's thick fabric, you're not going to use it for patches. Chazilu umna. But a bloodletter could use it, right? They will say for essentially like gauze, right? The bloodletter could use it after he does bloodletting to clean up the puncture area, to clean up the wound. So he's going to come to use it. To which the Gemara says beriska, so a sackcloth. So sackcloth, because it was very abrasive, was not used to clean up the wound after bloodletting. But 1 second, beriska she'ein bahen shalosh al shalosh she'ein ban arba al arba mi baile. So we'll say here's the issue: riska sackcloth has a different shear. Right, the Brisa spoke about a piece of material that was less than 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths. But for sackcloth, the shear actually in order for it not to be mekabel tuma has to be less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim. To which the Gemara says, no, ke'ein riska. It's not really sackcloth, right? It's actually just regular material. But it's like sackcloth in that it's a little bit abrasive, and therefore, again, a person is not really going to end up using it for anything. Therefore, they're going to leave it in the hole in the wall, and therefore it can plug up the wall. Okay? Va'iver va'basar hamidudalan bebehema ubechaya. So I'll say the next case was, remember again, you have a dangling limb of an animal, and that dangling limb is situated in the hole of the wall. So the Brisa said that again, that dangling limb situated in the hole of the wall could plug up the wall, prevent the spread of tumah. So Gemara says, I don't understand. Arkava azla. Why would you assume it's going to stay there? The animal is going to run away. Right? In other words, the animal is going to move. And when the animal moves, the dangling limb moves along with it. To which the Gemara says, bikshura. It's about an animal that is tied in place. Tied in place, okay, so it's not going anywhere. To which the Gemara says, okay, shachitle, but the owner of the animal could shecht it, right? Or even if it's an animal of hefker, right? Ultimately, someone could shecht it. To which the Gemara says, bitmeya. We're talking about a non-kosher animal. The Gemara says, mas bin nachri. We're talking. So you're not going to shecht it for yourself. You could sell it to a non-Jew. He could eat it. To which the Gemara says, bikachusha. We're talking about a very weak animal where it's not, even the Nachri is not going to buy it because the slaughter of it is not worth it. Pasik shadi le'uklavim. But you could cut off the dangling limb and feed it to the dogs. So why? So who says it's going to remain in place? Kevan di'iket sar bali chayim lo avid. No, because cutting off the limb is going to be tsar bali chayim, causing pain to an animal, and therefore one's not going to do it. I have of sheshachan b'chalon parach. So also, what about the case of the bird that is situated in the opening, right? The limb of the bird. Maybe the bird's going to fly away. B'kasher, the bird is tied in place. Okay, shachitle. Maybe you'll come to shech the bird. B'tameh, it's a non-kosher bird. Maz b'lei l'nachri. So you'll sell it to a nachri. B'klanisa. So about a klanisa bird. So Rashi points out over here, what's the chap with a klanisa bird? So Rashi says over here that halacha l'maisa of kachush ma'od. This is a very, it has no meat on it. It's a weak bird, it has no meat on it. Therefore, again, Nachri is not going to buy it. You could give it to your kid as a toy. This was the Talmudic Xbox, whatever. So, you give your kid a klanisa, right? So what happens? So I'm going to give him a klanisa, to which the Gemara says, no, b'misarit. It's talking about a bird that scratches. So a person is not going to give their kid a bird that scratches. Klanisa lo misarita. Gemara said, but everyone knows the klanisa bird does not go ahead and the klanisa bird does not scratch. To which the Gemara says, ka'in klanisa. You're right. It's not actually klanisa. It's like a klanisa in that it has no meat on it. It's a very weak bird, but unlike a klanisa, it does in fact scratch. So remember again, just understand this entire exercise is we're just trying to show remember, the Brisa gave me a list of things that can plug up a hole in a wall, right? A hole that is more than a tefach, that can plug up the hole in the wall in order to prevent the spread of tumah. And all we're trying to show is how each of these are items that you are going to leave in place. That's all. And thereby, by doing that, we're showing that the Brisa is not a contradiction to Shmuel. Because remember again, what did Shmuel say? An object could plug up a hole in the wall as long as what? Right? You're not removing it. as long as you're not removing it. If you're going to remove it, it can't plug up the hole. If you're not going to remove it, it can't plug up the hole. So all we're trying to show, going through this list, is trying to structure a case of the item that's being used to plug up the hole is going to remain in place. A person is not going to take it. Okay, next. We'll say first wide line. V'oved kochavim sheyasha b'chalon kai v'azal. So we'll say, so now the next case was, if you have an akum sitting in the opening of the wall, he plugs up the hole in the wall. Says the Gemara, but I don't understand. He's going to leave. He's going to which the Gemara says, bekafos. We're talking about a case where he's tied up. He's tied up, so he's not going anywhere. Okay. Asi chavri sharilei. But his friend could come and untie him. Right? In other words, fine, so he can't move, but his friends could come and untie him. B'mitzora. We'll say, what's the case? An akum was a mitzora. Right? Now, obviously, again, it's talking about, in this context, by the way, it's talking about like real leprosy, as opposed to when we talk about a mitzora. So remember, again, we call it leprosy, but remember, as we always say, saras is not a physical disease. Saras is a spiritual disease with physical symptoms and manifestations. In this case over here, it literally means the guy's a leper. So because he's a leper, no one's going to touch him. To which the Gemara says, I asi mitzora chavri sharilei, but another mitzora will come and untie him. I'll say everybody has to have friends, right? Everybody has to have friends. And I say he'll have a Mitzorah friend. Ella b'chavush malchus. No, by the way, what are we talking about over here? So we're talking about a guy who is bound by order of the king. When someone is bound by order of the king, then one thing is clear, which is what? No one's untying him. No one's untying him, right? Because if you do that, you're messing with the king. You're messing with the king. Someone's going to untie. So I'll say, so remember again, let's see, you'll say to yourself, come on, really? Really? Like this is. So remember, I'll say, we've been learning Gemara long enough to know that what the Gemara does in these kind of cases is just trying to figure out a way in which this could occur. Whether or not it's probable is irrelevant, right? Again, we're talking in theoretics, how such a situation like this could occur. So chavush b'malchus. Okay, good. The ben Shmona hamunach b'chalas. Well, the next case was an 8-month-old baby, right? Which again is non-viable. Occupying the space on the breach in the wall could go ahead and plug up the wall because of tumah. So the Gemara says, "I asya ime darile," but its mother will come and move it. To which the Gemara says, "B'Shabbos." They're talking about a case. This is a case on Shabbos. The Sanya ben Shmona hariu ke'even v'asla taltalo b'Shabbos. A baby delivered at 8 months, or we'll say because it's non-viable, it's like a stone, and therefore can't be removed on Shabbos. I'm saying that it can't be moved on Shabbos. We'll say, obviously, again, reflecting a different understanding or a different reality, right, of children delivered during the 8th month. And of course, again, I will say, don't apply this halacha l'maisa, but again, conceptually, a child delivered at 8 months was considered to be fundamentally non-viable and no more alive than a rock. As such, just as the rock ultimately again is considered to be muktzah, so too again this baby premature is also muktzah. Aval imo shocha lava manikasev ne'asakana. But the mother could kind of bend over the child and allow the child to nurse because of sakana. Now, interestingly enough, not sakana to the baby, because the baby is already considered to be non-viable, but rather sakana to the mother if she's unable to express milk. Okay, so melach, so salt. Chazile. So chazile, so both say, but 1 second, salt is usable. I don't understand. Both say, remember, because salt is usable, why would we be concerned that somebody's going to take the salt out of the breach, right, out of the opening and use it? To which the Gemara says, b'miri rasa. It's bitter salt. Bitter salt apparently can't be used even as a condiment, and therefore halacha l'maisa, it's going to remain in place. To which the Gemara says, I chazile oros. But you can use it to tan hides. For tanning purposes, the ispe kotzi, it has thorns in it. Kevan de kasha lechosel shakla. I will say salt is corrosive. No one's going to leave salt sitting on top of a wall or in the breach of a wall. Why? Because it could eat through the material of the wall. To which the Gemara says, the yasva achaspa, it's sitting on a layer of clay. To which the Gemara says, chaspa gufa techos. Oh, a layer of clay. So let the layer of clay be the obstruction itself. Or let's say Amud Beis 20b, the less beis shiura. Ultimately, again, there's not enough clay to serve as a barrier. Kidisnan cheres kidei litein bein patzim lechavero. So I'll say, what's the amount of clay that you would need in order to create an obstruction for tumah purposes? The amount of clay that you would normally use between the slats in the window. All right, kli cheres chazile. So we'll say next kli cheres, earthenware utensil. But 1 second, aren't we concerned? How could an earthenware utensil plug up the hole in the wall? Earthenware utensil is usable, and shouldn't we be concerned that a person is going to remove it from the opening? To which the Gemara says, demitnaf. It's talking about an earthenware utensil that became soiled. So because it's disgusting and gross, a person is not going to remove it and use it. But a bloodletter would use it, right? Because we'll say bloodletting in general. What does he care if he's going to collect the blood? What does it matter if it's a clean utensil, not a clean utensil? To which the Gemara says, deminkov. It's perforated. So because it's both dirty and gross and perforated, so therefore again it's not usable for anything. Because it's not usable for anything, therefore what? We'll say, therefore what? Therefore I can plug up the hole. Sefer Torah, the last case was a Sefer Torah. So right, the Brisa said that if you place a Sefer Torah in the opening of the wall, that could plug up the hole in the wall and keep the tumah contained. So Gemara says Sefer Torah chazi lemikra, but a Sefer Torah is usable. It's usable, right? Usable for Kriyas HaTorah. So why isn't it chotzeitz? Bebalui. We're talking about a worn out scroll. A worn out scroll that is no longer really going to be used for Kriyas HaTorah. Vaha by Geniza. But a worn out Sefer Torah scroll requires Geniza, right? It's supposed to be put away in Shemis. Shamte Genizasa. So I'll say, exactly, that's the point. Actually, what does the person plan on doing? That's going to be where they're leaving it. They're storing it there in the opening of the wall. That's the Geniza, that's the Shemis right there. Okay, so let's say, so bottom line, what we've now successfully done, it's actually a pretty incredible brisa. We've successfully done is, we brought this brisa as a kasha on Shmuel, right? So Shmuel wanted to say that halacha l'maisa, you have an opening in the wall. So again, if you breach the opening, the tumah is contained. But you could only plug the breach with an item that is going to remain in place. Any item that is going to be removed ultimately does not breach the wall. So we brought down this list. We thought for sure these are a list of items that could be removed, and we have successfully shown how each of the items mentioned in the brisa, because of its particular circumstances, are things that are not going to be removed from the breach, and therefore could serve to plug up the wall. Beautiful. So the Gemara goes weiter. Va'amar Rav says, Bakol osim mechitza, chutz mi melach v'ravav. So Rav said, you can make a mechitza, right? You can make a wall, a mechitza, out of anything aside from salt, and I will say ravav is literally schmaltz, fat. Now congealed fat. Now what's the logic behind it? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi's in the first short line. Chutz melach v'ravav, mipnei shamelach mispazer. Well, salt scatters, right? Salt scatters, and v'ravav nitach kishames chamim, and fat melts. Right, fat melts when it gets hot enough. Shmuel says, afilu melach. Shmuel says, no. You can make a wall out of salt. You can make a mechitza out of salt. So the Gemara says, Amar Papa. Papa says, interesting enough, was only because you mentioned salt. Amar Papa, lo pligi, ha b'melach stomis, ha b'melach istirukanis. So interesting, Rav Papa says two different types of salt. One is talking about a stone salt, and one is about istirukanis salt. I will say, so apparently, melach stomis, sodomite salt. What Rashi says is ava v'kasha ka'evin. First of all, it's thick, and it's very tough. It's very hard, like. So I will say, by the way, we've seen melech stomis before, right? Because melech stomis, the Gemara says, was part of the motivation for my machronim, right? So apparently melech stomis is very caustic, and if you would touch melech stomis and then put your fingers, but touch your eyes, chas v'shalom can lead to blindness. So one of the reasons why Chazal instituted my machronim, washing your hands before you bench, is in order to potentially remove any melech stomis from your fingers, from your hands. Obviously, the other reason ultimately is because of Nikios, is because of cleanliness. This is why the Aruch HaShulchan brings down, even though my machronim seems to be like a halacha, right? Yet many people don't wash my machronim. So the Aruch HaShulchan says, since the primary motivation of my machronim was because of Melech Stomis, and Melech Stomis is no longer here, right? Therefore, again, the reason for my machronim kind of went to the side. But again, those who maintain my machronim, because there's still the secondary reason of nikinos, of cleanliness. Okay, in any event, so Rav Papa suggests over here, it's not a contradiction. So again, Rav who said that you can't build the mechitza out of melach, out of salt, was talking about regular salt. Shmuel, who said that you can build the mechitza out of salt, was talking about sodomite salt, melech stomis, which was thicker and harder, and therefore again endured. The hasha the Amar Rabba os ose adam shnei tziburei melech umaniach alim kora. So this is interesting. Now that Rabba said, so we'll say we're transitioning over here just a moment to Hilchos Irvin. Remember again, back to our Eruvin days, if you have a mavoi, right, you have, remember again, a mavoi is like a shared alleyway, right? Homes opened up into shared chaserot, shared courtyards. Shared courtyards opened up into a shared alleyway called a mavoi. A mavoi opened up into a Rishus Harabim. In order to carry from your chaser to your mavoi, and the mavoi itself, you needed some type of tikkun, either a lechi or a korah, right? A horizontal beam, a vertical beam at the entranceway of the mavoi. So Rabbi says like this, what can you do? At the entranceway of the mavoi, you could make 2 pillars of salt and place a beam across the top, and that's good. That's metaking. That fixes the mavoi and allows you to carry in there. So watch this. So we'll say, interestingly enough, and Rabbah doesn't distinguish between what type of salt you use. Apparently, this will work with any kind of salt. Why? Because essentially, it's a pressure issue, right? The salt holds up the beam, and the pressure of the beam keeps the salt intact as a pillar. If that's the case, afilu melach istirukanis. So ultimately, again, even regular salt will say can be used to build a mechitza. V'lo pligi hadiika korah hadaleka korah. Therefore, again, it could very well be the machlokes Rabbi Shmuel is not really even about the type of salt, but ultimately, again, is there a beam on top of the wall? If there is a beam on top of the wall, it keeps the salt intact, whether it's regular salt or sodomite salt. If there is no beam, then Allah so you can't build the mechitza out of salt because it will disperse. Incredible. So bottom line for our purposes is we have effectively upheld the statement of Shmuel, which I will say, if you think about it, is a very, so therefore again, to close out, I feel like we became experts in this one area of Tum Tara. So here's what I know. So I will say, so now, number one, again, obviously we know Tumas Ohel, anything under the roof, same roof as a corpse, contracts Tumah. If there's a wall, literally a wall between the mace and let's say the rest of the home or rest of the structure, so the wall is chotetz, the wall creates a barrier. If there is an opening in that wall of a tefach or more, that allows the tumah to spread. But if you plug up that hole, then that keeps the tumah contained. What Shmuel teaches us is a material could only plug up the wall if what? If it is going to remain there. If you plug it up with something that is going to be removed, even though right now it's plugged up, the plug doesn't work. The plug only works if the material being used for the plug is something that is going to remain in place. Incredible. And that's halacha l'maisa. Let's go weiter. Marchikin es harechayim gil min hashachav shein arba min sherachav. So we'll say, remember again, back to the Mishnah. So what does the Mishnah say? So halacha l'maisa, again, if I have an oven in my chutzner, or sorry, a mill. So I say the halacha is I have to distance my mill from my friend's wall 3 tefachim. Now, the way it worked was a mill had 2 stones, a lower stone and an upper stone. The lower stone was 1 tefach wider than the upper stone. So you have to distance the mill 3 tefachim from the lower stone to my friend's wall, which is 4 tefachim from the upper stone. Okay, someone says, my time, what's the reason for that? Mishum tirya. So I'll say, so but pashtas we were assuming because of vibrations. Because when you use a mill, right, a mill shakes the earth, and the vibrations could be harmful to the wall itself, and therefore you have to distance it at a distance of 3 tefachim. I've hatanya, but we learned v'shal chamer shlosha minha istirobio shein arba minha kalas. So we'll say, but if you have a small mill, what we call again istirobio, and they call us, this was a mill that was actually worked by a donkey. This was a much smaller mill, and Abba said this type of mill does not go ahead and create vibrations. Yet there is still an obligation to go ahead and distance it. To which the Gemara says, "Hasam my tiryaika." There's no vibrations. They're elamishum color. You're right. It's not a din in vibrations, but rather again, it's a din in noise. Rabbi says it's an interesting machlokis over here. Is the Gemara is saying it's vibrations and noise, or just noise? That's the machlokis how to read the Gemara. But bottom line, b'pashas, it would seem whether the mill is causing vibrations or whether the mill is causing noise. Either way, there's an obligation to distance it from my friend's wall 3 tefachim. Beautiful. So if you have an oven, so oven was the same idea. Oven was wider at the bottom and narrower at the top. So you have to distance your oven. I have to distance my oven from my friend's wall 3 tefachim. It's 3 tefachim from the bottom, which is 4 tefachim from the top. To which the Gemara says, Amar Abaye Shmamina, Kalyo de Tanur Tefach. So what do we see from here? That ultimately, again, the difference between the bottom of the oven, bottom piece of the oven, and the upper part of the oven is one tefach, to which the Gemara said, nafkamin lemekach ulememkar. Why does this matter? This matters if you're in the market and you're buying an oven. It's understood about that the basic dimensions of an oven is that the bottom piece is one tefach wider than the upper piece. Good. Mishnah. So here we go. Lo yamid adam. So as we actually saw this Mishnah referenced before, a very interesting Mishnah. Lo yamid adam tanar b'soch be'abayis ele imkin yesh al gabov gova arba amos. So this is very interesting. So it seems to be that in general people would keep a tanur on the outside. You keep it in your chutzner. Let's say I want an indoor tanur. I want to put the tanur in my house. So the halacha is, I will say, you can't go ahead and keep a tanur in your house unless of an oven, unless of course you have at least 4 amos of space between the top of your oven and the ceiling. Now, we'll say, now here's what's interesting about this halacha. Take a look at Rashi. Elim kinyish al gabav chalal gova arba amos mipnei atanur adad tikra kidish lo yochas haor b'mikara b'tikra. Sorry. So it's actually very interesting. So halacha l'maisa, you can't go ahead and maintain a tanur in your house unless, of course, you are sure that it is not a fire hazard. Because we'll say this is even independent of, let's say, I'm the only person who lives in my house. I don't have tenants on the upstairs, but I have neighbors. So I can't do something in my house that creates a fire hazard in my house. Why? Because if there's a fire in my house, it can spread to the neighbors. So the halacha is, if you want to maintain an indoor tanur, you can, but you need at least 4 amos of space, right? 6 feet of space between the top of your tanur and the ceiling. Okay? So the Gemara says, similarly again, if you were keeping your tanur in, let's say, an upper story, so let's say I'm keeping my tanur on the 2nd story of my home, so we'll say, so there, not only do I need 4 amos of space between my tanur and the ceiling, but I also need a layer of plaster. I need a 3 tavach layer of plaster underneath the tanur. See here what's happening over here? So again, you always need at least 4 amos of space between the top of the tanur and your ceiling. And if you're keeping the tanur in an upper story, you need a layer of plaster of 3 tefachim underneath your tanur. Ubikira, supposed to say all this is a tanur. Now a tanur, tanur was something you did the cooking on the inside. A kira is more like a stove, which was a smaller unit, generated less heat. Ubikira tefach. Therefore, if you're keeping a kira, let's say in an upper story, all you need is a layer of plaster that is 1 tefach. You don't need 3 tefachim of plaster underneath it, only 1 tefach. Rashi says over Bekira Maziba Tavach, Afik Li Cheres, Shishov Simbaktir Sha'achalala Vein Osim Socha has a godok more Shosim Tanner. So a kira doesn't generate as much heat as the tanner does, therefore it only needs 1 layer of 1 tefach of plaster underneath it. Okay, Vim Hizik Mishal Mashizik. I will say, now watch this. This is fascinating. This is a fascinating discussion. Let's say I took all of the precautions. Right, I did what I was supposed to do. So I put a kira. I have a tanur in my house. There is 4 amos of space between the top of my kira, the ceiling, or it's in the 2nd story and there's 4 amos of space and there's a 3 layer of plaster. But despite all of that, a fire starts and damages my neighbor. So the Mishnah says, look, you're still chayiv. Even though you took all of the precautions that you were supposed to take, I understand. Thank you, shkoyach. Right, the halacha thanks you. But if you damage, you damage. We'll say, watch this. Rabbi Shimon says, no. This is incredible. Rabbi Shimon says, no. That's the whole point. If you take these precautions, then what? You're not chayiv for damages. In other words, that's the whole idea. If you take necessary safety measures, but despite that damage occurs, the halacha says, I'm exempt because I've done what I am supposed to do to ensure that I do not damage my neighbor. Incredible. So the Gemara is supposed to say it's really like a fundamental machlokes over here. Next, lo yiftach adam chanu shanach tumin v'shel tzivah tachas also shachavir. Suppose I watch this. So let's say I lease space under Ruvain, right? So Ruvain in an upper story, he has an otzar, right? He has a storage area. Now I will say now bipashtos, when the Gemara talks about otzar, it's talking about storage area for wheat, oil, or wine. wheat, oil, or wine. So we'll say, so now halacha l'maisa. The Mishnah says, I have a lower. I'm renting out the lower story. If Ruvain has storage for wheat, oil, or wine in the upper story, I cannot go ahead and open up a bakery or a dye shop underneath it. Now, what's the logic? The logic seems to be that both of these things generate smoke, right? And smoke is going to have a detrimental effect on the stuff that Reuven is storing in the upper story, right? So therefore, again, I can't open up a bakery or a dye shop, nor could I open up a stable underneath. I will say that's an odor issue. So the Gemara says, "Be'emes b'yayin etiru avalo refes bakar." So I say, so ultimately, again, in reality, ultimately, again, if Reuven is storing wine in the upper story, I actually can open up a bakery or a dye shop because actually, again, the Mishnah points out that the smoke is actually beneficial to the wine, but I can't open up a stable underneath it because again that odor is going to be deleterious. Rashi says, Gemara, I vatanya betanu arba b'kira shlosha. So we'll say 1 second. We learned in a brayso that for a tanur, so we'll say, so this is talking about now again, going back to the idea, if I'm putting my tanur or my kira in an upper story, so not only do I need the space between the top of the kira and the ceiling, I also need a layer of plaster underneath it. So the Brisa says you need 4 tfachim of plaster for a tanur, 3 tfachim of plaster for a kira, right? But we learned in our Mishnah, that's what? You need 4 tfachim, you need 3 tfachim for a tanur and 1 tafach for a kira. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, Rabbi kitanya hi bedinachtumin. The tanur didan ki kira dinachtumin. So we'll say, so ultimately again, that's talking about again the kalim, the utensils of a baker. So okay, essentially like industrial ovens, right? And industrial stoves. So those generate much more heat. Because they generate much more heat, therefore they need a thicker layer of plaster underneath it. Okay, incredible. Lo yiftach chanus. So again, we'll say, remember again now the Mishnah said. So essentially, halacha, we'll say, no, we'll have to stop for shkoyach. Okay, good. We did good for today, Baruch Hashem. We'll have to stop over here for today. Sorry, I know we went a little bit quickly. Sorry for the later start, I will say, but what a Baruch Hashem, what a beautiful beginning to the week. Shkoyach, everyone. Have a great day, everyone. Everyone's going to have a great day.